All right, so welcome to Rockley, and have Michael here from Sador42Vinyl, and we're going to discuss extreme metal, kind of why I got into it, and you kind of being my tour guide of sorts, and uh, just kind of discussing like a little bit of your history with music and kind of like how you got into it, and then I'll kind of segue and say why I became interested and how you helped me, and we'll kind of hit on some maybe like major albums or turning points, maybe even for yourself, and then also I'll share the ones that really grasped me and got me to really jump in. So yeah, tell us kind of like your how you got into extreme metal.
All right, yeah. So my experience with extreme metal was it started in high school. I listened to my musical journey really started with Motley Crue. That was where I first started.
Okay.
And on the way to my first concert ever, Motley Crue, a kid who came with us had a mixtape of a bunch of thrash like Metallica, Megadeth, and a bunch of bands like that. And that was the first time that I heard like music like that, like something way heavier than Motley
Hmm.
Crue. So I started going out and buying, like Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, just all kinds of different metal, and starting with Metallica and Megadeth, those were kind of like, with Peace Cells and Master of Puppets in particular, those are pretty heavy thrash records. So, I was just looking for more stuff like that. And, I would notice kids around school wearing like Slayer shirts and stuff like that. So I started exploring that. I got a hold of a Slayer record and I was like, wow, this is really extreme. Like Slayer was like kind of a jump up from, especially Rain and Blood, when that was the first album that I heard from Slayer. And then I started going to the back catalog and stuff. But yeah, that was pretty heavy stuff back then, in the late 80s. Um, and then I met a couple kids at school that were into the same music, and they were into, I think we talked about this before, they were into like Creator. They started into the German stuff. They were into Creator and Destruction. And Creator, the vocals of Milla Troza were just like really hard for me to get into at first. I was just like, what is that
Yeah.
guy's voice? It's so gravelly, and like I was like, I don't even know if I like this, because all the other vocalists, even though they were kind of gravelly or whatever, or shouty kind of vocals, they weren't like that.
Hmm.
Like Milla was a unique kind of vocalist for that type of music. So that was a little bit extreme. So from there, we bought tons of thrash albums, went to tons of concerts, during high school. In the like maybe around 1990, 91, we had a video for a concert. I forget the name of the concert right now, but it was a video, and it had Forbidden on it. It had Dark Angel. It had a band called Raven, which they were just like kind of a new wave of British heavy metal kind of band. But it also had Death and Chuck Schuldiner, and it had him playing live. And we were like, what is this? It was at the time that Leprosy was out. So we all got Death Leprosy. We're like, this is insane. So once we started playing that album, we started looking for more stuff like that. And
Okay.
that's kind of where I started getting into that. Was kind of the beginning of death metal, like the very late 80s, early 90s. Um, and yeah, we started buying everything from Death, Pestilence, Cannibal Corpse had come out at the time, so all that early 90s stuff, late 80s. Morbid Angel was huge, Altars of Madness. We bought all that stuff at that time. I was reading Metal Maniacs magazine, getting ideas from there. My friends were finding stuff online, or not online, but in magazine. There was no online. We were finding stuff in magazines and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how we started. And a lot of it was blind buying at the record store. We would pull out an album, a cassette from a record label that we recognized. And at that time, it was like Roadrunner, Noise. These record labels were like record labels we knew had, extreme heavy metal music. And a lot of times we would buy stuff blind before hearing it. Almost all that death metal I just mentioned, Pestilence, Morbid Angel, all that stuff, we bought it never having heard it before.
Oh
And we were
wow.
just like blown away.
And
So
so what? Not to age you, but what time? So what time period is
I
this?
graduated in 1991. I'm 49 this year, so I'll be 50 at the end of the year. So yeah, it's been quite a while, that I've been into the music. I graduated young. I think I graduated when I was 17. I started like a little bit early. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, so yeah. So that is my
Oh.
journey, my almost my entire journey, really, of getting into heavy metal and extreme music.
Okay, so it sounded like you were just it was just a natural progression for you, like you
It
from
was, yeah, with me and my friends, it really was just kind of we were looking for this stuff, Once we heard it, once we heard Death, Leprosy, him singing like that, and we were just like, we want more of this, and we were able to find quite a bit of it, and it was all fresh and new. It was really cool.
so
And then
would you
those
say
bands
that
started
that
touring and coming to our city in Detroit, and we were like, this is amazing. So we saw a bunch of bands.
uh so you point to that one that Death track and Chuck and so that track was like would you say that was like the catalyst that really
I would say, yeah.
pushed you to dive in?
Exactly. Yeah, it really was. We started looking for stuff like that. We didn't know that there was more bands like Death at the time. We just didn't
Mhm.
know. So once we figured that out, I can't remember. Maybe one of us bought something. We're just like, what is this? And it ended up sounding like Death. And we're like, oh, we want more of this stuff. So yeah, we started. It was a lot of magazine articles, and reviews and descriptions, and them calling it death metal, in the magazine, So we knew what we
Yeah.
were buying or what genre we were into, and yeah, finding those bands was really cool. Bolt Thrower was another band we found. I never got into Bolt Thrower that much, but they were a real early death metal band. Yeah, tons of stuff like that. Just finding it and buying it blind and based on magazine reviews.
which which is such a foreign concept to me that you had to be reliant upon somebody's description of what they heard and then you would go out and buy it. Where now, I mean, you can pull up anything and at
Pretty
least
much, yeah.
sample it. Yeah.
It's kind of good and bad. I mean, I think there's
Hmm.
just tons more bands now too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it would be much harder. Like back then, you were really reliant just on labels putting stuff out, and they didn't put a ton of records out, maybe a couple
Right.
a month, maybe two or three a month. You would, a label would put albums out. Now they're putting like sometimes four or five records out a week, labels. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
pretty crazy.
Um, is do you would you say that there are some um I don't know gateway albums for you that kind of like got you a taste for the heavier stuff and kind of snowballed into going into the extreme direction? I know we talked about that one track from Chuck and Death, but
Yeah. Yeah, there's like Leprosy, the album Leprosy was a big deal. Um we had bought the Pestilence record, Consuming Impulse. That album we loved. Um what else did we buy? We bought Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness had come out. A big one, a really big one was Obituary Cause of Death. That album just
mm,
really blew us away. And we, knowing the band members and stuff like that, we recognized that James Murphy was playing guitar on that Cause of Death record, the solos. And we were like, wait a minute, he was on Spiritual Healing with Death and Chuck, So we were like, oh man, these guys are kind of like band members are kind of sharing each other's members or whatever. uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it was really interesting how we discovered all that stuff. And yeah, and like I said, it was just blind buys. Those are probably big ones that we, Deicide, when the Deicide record came out, the self-titled first Deicide record, that was huge for us. um yeah, and I think and that's kind of where kind of you come in, is when you started getting into asking me questions about that kind of stuff, like where should I start? And that's, I was
yeah.
like, oh, let's start the same place I did,
Well,
and
yeah.
see how it goes.
Um, Well, I guess we should establish. I mean, we kind of met through the comments on my videos, and then just sparked up a conversation. I think through Instagram, and then and yeah, you were kind of basing off my posts. I think you were like, hey, have you listened to this or heard this? And then um, and I think before we even talked about it, I had made it a personal goal of wanting to get into heavier music. I didn't even know it was called extreme metal at the time, but or that is a term you could use. And then uh but yeah, just seeing the passion people in the vinyl community and on Instagram of just for these bands that to me at the time just sounded, like noise. I don't like
Yeah,
just
explain to me, like, yeah, what first, the first extreme metal that you listened to, like, what do you remember what it was, and you were like turned off by it, or
it's funny. I was trying to recall that, and uh, I mean, and even now to some extent, I'm just a scaredy cat. So like, especially when I was younger, like MTV, I think VH1, MTV2. I'm trying to think of like all the music channels that were out there. CMT, BET, like MTV2 probably played the heavier stuff. Would you say? I can't
maybe? I
recall
mean, I was
at
already
the
done
time.
with MTV when
But anyway,
MTV2
like my
came
brother
out.
would turn on stuff, and I remember hearing stuff come on and just being like, I would just leave the room, like, oh, that's scary. Because I would have nightmares about the like it would just sound like that's what the devil sounds like. I don't
Right,
know, like
right,
he's gonna come and get me. Um, I was afraid of like Kiss and their like face paint, even though now it's like, oh gosh, that was so silly to be like,
right.
I mean,
Well, I
uh,
had a similar experience when I was a kid. My mom had Alice Cooper Killer, the album,
mhm.
and the back cover of that album where their hair is all like frizzed out and there's a snake, I'm like, that
Oh yeah.
freaked me out so bad that I actually scratched her record. I was like, I do not want you listening to this. I
Oh
destroyed that record.
no.
I was probably like 6 years old or something. I was like, this is scary. And like you said, having nightmares about it. And
Yeah.
I put a big gouge in her album, and I was like, no, no, no. And now, like, Killer is so tame and comparatively.
Well, yeah.
Like you
I was gonna
said,
say
like, yes,
now you're a fan of it.
absolutely. I love that album.
uh, but I think I want to say, is it Ace Ventura that has Cannibal
Cannibal
Corpse?
Corpse, yeah.
Okay, and I had no idea at the time who the band was, but yeah, that scene comes on, and yeah, that was like, oh, that is terrifying music. Um,
That was probably a lot of people's first time they heard death metal, like real death metal.
oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, a very like non-death metal movie. I don't even-
Exactly.
and yeah,
Exactly.
you're watching that, and then that scene comes on, like where I would run away in horror, and then there's some people like, oh, I need to go check this out.
Right, right.
um, so, but in record collecting, and it's like, yeah, you kind of, I think you just develop a taste for heavier stuff as you go,
Yeah, I think
or
I think
can.
I think us as collectors, we like to experiment and get into stuff that, like, especially like I think you mentioned before, when other people have the passion for something, you're like, why are you so passionate about that? Maybe I should listen to a couple albums or something, or some of what you're talking about, so I can see if it does something for me.
Well, on some of my earlier videos, I tried to develop this segment of like help me like them, where it's like these are bands that I just like I know they're widely loved. There's mass appeal there. They have legions of fans, but I hear the hit come on the radio and it's just not doing anything for me. Um, but I think I've learned over time that sometimes there's like an album to start with that like may not have the hits on it, or for this reason or that reason, a fan will tell you like, no, go listen to this, or like try this, or listen to this track. And sometimes, and I found that most times I can usually figure out, even if I don't fully become a fan, I can better understand where fans come from. Like, okay, I get it at least now
Right,
of
right.
like why you would like this. When speaking of the Black Album,
Yeah,
I
we can talk
later,
about it.
you know, in my record collecting journey, I've realized that that is a, I guess, metalheads of before the, if you were a metalhead prior to the Black Album, that's like a, uh, when they've sold out, gone pop or whatever, like we just discussed.
Yeah,
But that was for me. I mean, that was the heaviest album that I liked, right? Like that was something that like, oh, I enjoy this. I think this is good. But
exactly. And I think the point I was gonna make is that there's gateway albums. There's
sure,
albums that can get you into a genre that you weren't into before. Metallica is a good example of that, where the Black Album is an album that most people heard just in general. And it maybe got them into going into the back catalog, and let's say, hey, if this Black Album is good, what else do they have to offer?
did did you ever? I would like build these rules for myself. Like when I look back on it, it's like so silly. But it was like, oh, I'm not a metalhead, so I don't listen. Like I can't listen to this, or like I shouldn't listen to this because that's not me, or like I don't fit in that culture, or I'm not part of that scene, so I don't. I would like hinder or like close off musical avenues because I felt like, oh, I don't fit into that box. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I probably more so in high school, like you definitely had more clicks.
And
And
that's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
yes, in high school, definitely for sure. When you were a metalhead, I hated Britney Spears, whatever, all that stuff. Only as I got older would I be like, I've listened to a lot of different type of music growing up, that wasn't
Mhm.
metal that I know I like. And,
Right.
you know, that's kind of like the good thing about collecting vinyl is you can kind of go back, and like, because like
Hmm.
I loved like a lot of 80s stuff. I grew up in the 80s, so I listened to Madonna, even if it was on in the background or whatever. I listened to, Martika, Nina 99 Left Balloons. I listened to all that MTV stuff and it all sunk in, right? Then I
Hmm.
discovered metal, and metal was like my passion, right?
Yeah.
Madonna wasn't my passion. Nina wasn't my passion, but all that music kind of sits there and you're like, you know what? And then when I come across those albums in the wild, I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy this because I remember liking this. And I do have uh, parts of my collection that are dedicated to that stuff that I used to listen to that I know I like because I grew up with it, but I didn't, fall in love with it, or it wasn't like you said, me, it wasn't
Right.
my
Right.
genre. But yeah, and yeah, I don't feel any of that now. I mean, I still know people who, you watch some of the videos in the VC, and all they'll show is metal records. That's it.
Sure.
And that was one thing that attracted me to your channel is that you were showing like John Cougar Mellencamp, and you were like, I love John Cougar Mellencamp. And then you were showing like Morrissey, and you were like, I love Morrissey. And then you pull up, a Nevermore record and be like, I love Nevermore. And then Candlemass, I'm like, what is going on in this guy's head? So it really intrigued me, and I was like, I kind of understand that, even though I may not get into John Mellencamp, like you said,
Right.
a person's passion for it, it makes you kind of appreciate those artists that somebody's really into them.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's so infectious. Like you see somebody so excited, or um and it's, I don't know, it's really satisfying to me to, I don't know, push yourself to like listen, or like really like dig into these genres you thought you may have never liked or wouldn't ever like, or just weren't exposed to, or um, and so anyway, that was definitely the case for me with extreme metal. I mean, I never, even just like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years
Uh-huh.
ago, I would have told you like, oh, there's no. like no way I'll ever listen to that.
So, what
um
was one of the first albums that I recommend? Like, because I know you kind of wanted to, like, you were listening to Nevermore, you were listening to Candlemass. I knew that, and then I
mhm.
started. I think I recommended some stuff to you. I don't remember what like the first thing that you bought that I recommended was.
I think it was we were more in like the thrash stuff, and I think this one really like if I can get the reflection off this Toxic record. Think this really changed what I thought or understood thrash to be. Um, and so it definitely had like the clean soaring vocals that I think you knew I would be attracted to.
Right,
Um,
Candlemass type
and,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, just incredible guitar work. It would have been really the thrash list, what we refer to as the list. I mean that really like pushed a boundary for me as far as like um at that point. I mean, thrash was like the heaviest thing I'd ever listened to. It had Mortal Sin, Assassin, Destruction, Creator, Sodom, Exodus, Dark Angel, Voivod, DRI, Violence, Power Mad, Coroner, Flotsam and Jetsam. Is it Sabbath or Sabbath? Sabbath?
Sabbath.
Dreamweaver? Sabbath?
Yeah, love that album.
Metal Church, Atrophy, Cerebral Fix, Cyclone Temple, X-Hoarder, Hellstar, Laz
Laz
Rocket,
Rocket, Laz Rocket.
Rocket.
Yeah, I go either way.
Yeah, Mordred and Paradox. Even like going through the list, I still was like real skeptical on the death metal.
And now you're wearing an At the Gates T-shirt.
And that brings me to that was the one you I think you sent me that list and I started going through it, and then you had sent me that and you had said kind of like, hey, when you're ready, I think this will be like your next jump, like what you need to check out.
I think I found
And
a really good deal on it. I was like, it was like $20
you
or something.
did.
And I was like, if you're gonna jump on this, jump on it. Just buy this album, and when you're ready, play it because it's worth the whatever $17 or whatever it was. I'm like, it's
Hmm.
you're not gonna regret buying it for especially for this price. And if you like it, don't like it, whatever. But
Right.
just it was a and that is a really good album to listen to because it is a bridge between thrash metal and death metal. It's it has both of those elements in there, and the melody is really strong on that album too.
Which completely changed my perception of death metal because I just thought it was like this genre that just bludgeons you with, devoid
It
of any
can be
sort of.
that. It
It
definitely
can,
can
and
be,
I realize it can be,
but it's not always.
completely devoid of melody or, um, but that album, I just really shocked me, I guess, as far as like I was put it on and really enjoyed it. Now I didn't like in it. It was uh the musicianship. I as far as like the what the guitars were playing, the drums. Like I was like, oh, I love this. I didn't love the vocals at first,
Okay.
but now I listen to it and I'm like, oh, I love the way he sings. It's like you can, I don't know, you can discern what he's saying, but it also just has all this gruff, you know, growl to
Yeah.
it
It's funny
and
because
vibe.
death metal has definitely evolved, just like all music, within 5 years or so, it starts evolving, like almost
Yeah.
all genres do that. They all start and then all the bands kind of sound similar, but then other bands were like, well, I'm taking this idea and I'm doing something a little different with it. And then either it becomes something or it doesn't. But I think
Hmm.
the melodic death metal with what At the Gates put out at the time, what they started, that Gothenburg sound, a bunch of bands came out of that scene. Yeah, they started doing something a little bit different. They started really mixing the super fast thrash metal with the death metal and then adding the melody, and it just became something that was kind of brand new in a way, and it was just really, really cool to experience that. And it's a whole, melodic death metal is an entire genre now, on its own, and it stands on its own
Yeah.
because there's tons and tons of bands. So okay, so we started. I got you into thrash. You started buying a bunch
Yeah.
of thrash metal records. Out of the list, do you have like favorites now, or are you still kind of exploring those?
I think before you created the list, that Toxic record, really love that. Same with those two Forbidden records.
Yes.
Uh,
Those weren't on the list,
man.
right? Though I must have recommended those before.
Yeah, I think you recommended those before, and then once I like really like those, then I think you made the list for me. Oh, that Hellstar No Ferratu. Oh, really like that one. I mean, they're all so good. I mean, it's hard to like. I genuinely really enjoyed all of it. It's just like those ones, like I remember them standing out quite a bit for me.
Right.
Um,
What was the like I guess the first death metal or more extreme metal record besides so At the Gates was The Bridge.
Yeah, so that would probably be the one that like was very eye-opening where I was like, okay, let's really explore this now. And then I think you sent Paradise Lost. Trying to get the reflection off.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you had mentioned you were like, oh, if you like Candlemass, this would be a good transition. And I definitely agree that that's the atmosphere they create. I would think is kind of like you could say similar or has a mood similar to Candlemass, and then you have
Right.
the death metal vocals on top of it. Um, which again, it definitely took some time for me to appreciate and enjoy because it would be like, oh, I really enjoy the music was how I was at first, but the um, I was like, but I was like, oh, if they would just sing, you know.
True. True. Like I felt that
Um,
way with I mentioned Milla from Creator, I was like because Betrayer off of Extreme Aggression was the song I heard. I heard it on MTV and just the vocals on that were so different from the other thrash metal bands that I was hearing at the time. And yeah, it was an adjustment. It definitely was an adjustment, but I liked the music so much. I was like, this
mhm.
music, this riffing is so amazing. And I really, really like this. Can I get used to the vocals?
Um, well, like we've talked about before, it's like now that I have listened to it and have become used to it, I definitely notice the nuances between death metal vocalists and certain ways that they achieve that sound with their voice and how they distort their voice and have
Right.
developed preferences of like what I like in it or don't like in it. So the intention of this video, I think, was to
Right.
one kind of uh, give a perspective of where we're coming from, and then how we approached um, extreme metal, death metal, and uh, I guess try to explain why someone who doesn't listen to it would want to or try it or
Right.
and so I guess to wrap this all up is I would say exploring this has been one of the more satisfying like journeys in vinyl collecting that I've ever had. Just really like there's so many layers and depth and to the genre, and uh, it's like man, I feel like I was missing out on so many incredible albums just because of these rules or that I put on myself uh, or just not giving it enough time to uh, stick with me or understand it. And so now that it clicks with me, it's like, gosh, I can't imagine not listening to it ever, or yeah. So,
Yeah. That's cool. And yeah, I'm super glad I was able to help in some way, giving you
oh,
suggestions and things like that.
well, because with your knowledge of knowing, like, okay, these are kind of like pillars of the genre that like you need to hit or should at least give a try, even if you don't like them. Like, um, having that, which I mean, even when you research the internet and ask people, like some of those would pop up, but some of them I don't know that they would have. So yeah, I mean, having you as a guide definitely very thankful.
Yeah, I think anybody who's deep into the genres of death metal or thrash metal, they would probably give you a completely different list. It would be interesting
Oh,
to see how much
definitely. Yeah,
overlapping there would be, if any.
you're right. Yeah.
So I think everybody's journey is a little bit different. So it's interesting.
Well, we talk about these like gateway albums, and it's like it's funny because there's no one gateway album for everybody. Like that's
Right,
gonna get this is gonna get them all. It's like
right.
everybody kind of has that one album or track that like gets them over. And I didn't even talk about that prior to your influence on me is like the kind of more of the screamo or metalcore stuff that I kind of dabbled in that had both the clean and harsh singing, not definitely not like death growls, but you know what I'm talking like
Yeah, yeah.
that. And but in exploring death metal, I think I have even more of an appreciation for that um dichotomy or like dissonance that they were trying to create by including both types, like having that contrast between and what that creates. And like you
Right.
said, it's like somebody listens to something and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to add this spin to it. And then it becomes popular and you have 1,500 bands that try to
Right,
copy
right.
it. So
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about that in another video where we talk about, like the melodic death metal stuff of the
yeah,
band,
yeah, yeah,
clean
for sure.
vocals and the harsh vocals and stuff. Because
Yeah, so
there's a lot
I
of
don't
different
know
bands in that.
how often we'll do this, but if the plan is to have a reoccurring discussion, and uh, maybe we can, if we get any feedback from anybody, if they specific topics or anything they'd be interested in having us talk about because they like listening to us,
That would
we
be fun
could
if people
we could
like listening
approach
to
the
us.
subject.
All
So,
right, cool.
well, thank you, and I definitely uh, had a good time. So hopefully you enjoyed our conversation.
I did, and it'll be interesting when it all gets edited together. See what we come up with.
Exactly.
All right,
All right.
cool.
So till next time.
See ya.
See ya.